Housing supply is a real challenge in many member states, as we can see from the contributions today.
The Irish government would absolutely love to blame the European Union for its massive failure to build houses.
I called on the EU to address the housing crisis, to treat the right to housing as the human right that it is.
Between 2010 and 2022, EU residential property prices rose by 47%.
Housing is a human right. Only from the safety of one's home can a person start solving other challenges in their lives.
Housing, as we all know, remains one of the most critical challenges facing governments across Europe.
If we really want to take a critical step towards making houses more affordable and creating the conditions to promote families, we have to rethink very strict regulations on energy neutrality of houses and environmental transition that definitely makes houses less affordable.
Because homes are for people, not for profit.
Our shared goal of delivering decent, affordable housing for all citizens requires continued flexibility and support at almost every level, including this one.
Rents have reached record levels, with the average rent now hitting €2,300 per month, and most young Dubliners have given up on the hope of ever owning a home.
We have millions of European citizens that can no longer afford a house, or they have to spend more than half of their income to pay rent or a mortgage.
4,400 Irish children are homeless. That is 4,400 stolen childhoods. We can and we must house our people, and as has been said, a roof is a right.
This has heavy social consequences, as increasing risk of poverty, but also economic consequences.
In January 2021, as rapporteur of the European Parliament's report on access to decent and affordable housing, I called on the EU to address the housing crisis, to treat the right to housing as the human right that it is. And I'm happy to see that we have made some progress. We are now working towards ending homelessness, and we made sure cities can combat illegal rentals on Airbnb. But unfortunately, the housing crisis has only worsened since then. House prices and rents, as well as homelessness, just keep rising all over Europe. With a Commissioner for Housing and a European Affordable Action Plan for Housing in the works, we are finally treating the issue with the urgency it deserves. Because homes are for people, not for profit. And let me be clear, the issue isn't just the lack of investment in housing. It is the wrong type of investment. 40 billion euros were actually invested by institutional investors in Berlin in a decade. And the result is that one of the most affordable cities became unaffordable. We must act as the EU to really curb speculative investments. We need more social investment. The Commission's plans, which include boosting affordable housing, are promising, but we need to acknowledge that we need more public investment in social housing, and then funding or loans from the European Investment Bank should not go to the institutional investors that are now driving the crisis. We must ensure that investments contribute to long-term affordability through strict conditions.
Nearly 1.3 million people sleep rough or without a permanent accommodation in the EU. 400,000 children are homeless, and I welcome the long-awaited affordable housing plan by the Commission, which must build on the successful housing first principle. This requires actually a change in our mindsets, because previously a home was an outcome when a person demonstrated progress in their life, such as finding a job or tackling substance abuse. Thinking was that only by solving other issues first, a person deserves a home. But the reality is exactly the opposite. Housing is a human right. Only from the safety of one's home can a person start solving other challenges in their lives. When we discuss about what affordable housing means, who builds and who owns it, and how it is regulated, we must keep in our minds the most vulnerable people whose lives can actually be transformed if we, politicians here and all over Europe, just put housing first.
Thank you. This is a very important debate. The Irish government would absolutely love to blame the European Union for its massive failure to build houses. But the reality is that it's all on them. One of its failures is to get enough workers trained. But the reality is you'll never get enough workers trained in an industry that doesn't provide you with certainty. My father was a builder in Ireland, a carpenter. In the 60s he had to emigrate to get work. In the 70s there was work in Ireland so he could come back. In the 80s he had a family, including myself and my 5 siblings. He couldn't emigrate, there was no work. All of us had to emigrate. In the late 90s we had another boom. Then we had another bust in the 2000s, and then everyone had to emigrate again. I met with Christoph Hansen, the potential future Agri Commissioner, during the week, and my assistant was with me. And the question was asked, would you ask your children to get into agriculture? And the answer was no, because you can't have a guaranteed future. Likewise, I would not advise my children to go into the building industry until we get a plan, a long-term plan that doesn't treat these workers like dirt and provides them with a definite future. Ye wouldn't do it if ye didn't have a future.
I'm glad that at last housing has been recognized as a European issue. We have millions of European citizens that can no longer afford a house, or they have to spend more than half of their income to pay rent or a mortgage. And this, beware, it does not simply affect, as in the past, lowest income household, but is increasingly affecting the middle class. And this has heavy social consequences, as increasing risk of poverty, but also economic consequences. In certain areas, firms can no longer attract or retain workers simply because the salary they can offer can barely cover for rent. So this is really a problem we need to address, and it's crucial that the EU starts playing a role in supporting affordable housing and public investments, as many colleagues have mentioned. But beware, there are many other aspects to be addressed. For example, why does the official measure of the inflation rate, which serves as the basis to negotiate wages, exclude the owner-occupying housing costs, for example? And also think about our banking and financial regulation. Is it adequate to address and prevent speculative bubbles in the housing market? There are many things, a lot of work that has to be done to fully understand and address the causes of the problem and trying to find some European solution, keeping one principle in mind, that housing is not just a market like any other, but is a primary need.
Housing supply is a real challenge in many member states, as we can see from the contributions today. But we all know that home ownership is really good for society, and as legislators I think we have to make sure that we do everything we can to make it a reality for all of our citizens. And whilst member states' governments are at the front line of actually delivering and tackling the crisis, there's a lot of things that we can do here at an EU level. So first of all, I think we can learn from each other what works and what doesn't work, and don't repeat it. We can ensure that there are EU funds available and that the rules around planning and procurement are not overly onerous, as they are in my own country. And we can coordinate resources to ensure that governments do have access to the skilled workforce. Because in Ireland, money is not our problem. It's the lack of the people to actually build the houses has been an issue for us over the last number of years. But because the challenge is different in different places, we do need to recognise and monitor the problems. In Ireland, though, we're making important progress. More than 115,000 homes have been delivered since 2020, and it's rising. In the last 12 months alone, 51,000 new builds have been commenced, and the number of first-time buyers is at its highest levels in years, thanks to the government interventions such as the Help to Buy scheme. But there's an awful lot more we can do, and this social challenge should rightly be at the top of our new Housing Designate Jorgensen's Commission task, and I want to wish him well and support him.
Honourable Committee, esteemed Chair, I wish to express my heartfelt gratitude to all 52 MEPs who signed on to my question to the European Commission about the timing of the withdrawal of the Buildings Directive. Between 2010 and 2022, EU residential property prices rose by 47%. 10.6% of people in the cities of the Union lived in housing they spent over 40% of their income on. Currently, more than half of Poles aged 25 to 34 live with their parents. Despite the fact that the vast majority work, they cannot afford to buy their own home. After 5 years leading the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen suddenly realized that simulated actions in housing were necessary, so she added the name housing to the name of one of the offices, holds a short debate, and expresses concern. Meanwhile, the same president of the European Commission pushed through a directive on the energy performance of buildings in the last straight of the old term, which under the beautiful label of concern for energy efficiency means reducing the possible sources of heating one's home. This results in higher maintenance costs for properties and a sharp increase in the costs of new construction. Therefore, I call on the European Commission to repeal the building directive. I urge the Commission to withdraw from actions that raise housing costs and to take steps that will promote deregulation and reduce the cost of meeting basic needs, which is the need for home ownership. Leave people alone and let them live as they can afford. Thank you.
Housing, as we all know, remains one of the most critical challenges facing governments across Europe. Given its importance, I believe a dedicated committee should be established by Parliament to address this issue in a focused and comprehensive manner. I would ask that a Europe-wide plan be formulated by this committee, which would then be presented to the Commission and the Council for evaluation. And while I cannot speak for the situation in every member state, I do know that in Ireland we've been confronting a housing crisis for several years now. Have we solved it? Most definitely not, but we must acknowledge that significant progress has been made. We've increased housing output, improved access for first-time buyers, removed unnecessary regulatory barriers and fast-tracked some but not all planning delays, and mobilised state lands for affordable and social housing. These are important steps forward. However, to sustain and build on this momentum, it is essential that we review state aid rules as determined by the EU to ensure that they do not hinder member states in addressing housing emergencies when they arise. Our shared goal of delivering decent, affordable housing for all citizens requires continued flexibility and support at almost every level, including this one.
Housing constitutes a basic right for all citizens, yet it has turned into a privilege for a large part of European citizens. The real estate market has been left unprotected by investment markets and short-term rentals. As a result, the cost of finding housing has skyrocketed. The inability to find affordable housing is the biggest barrier for young people in the European Union to leave their parents' home. The housing problem is European and requires immediate European solutions, with regulatory interventions to protect citizens from foreclosures and evictions, and more oversight in the European real estate market by financing a European social housing program that will be put into action in member countries based on their national and local requirements.
Firstly, I would like to suggest looking to housing from perspective of demographic winter. As highlighted by researchers, the housing market is an example of social structural factor that can inadvertently impact age at first birth. In countries where it's easier to obtain a mortgage or enter the public rental market, individuals are more able to establish themselves and enter into family formation earlier. Research also showed the impact of affordable housing on child development. They found that when families spend more than half of their incomes on housing, their children's reading and math ability tended to suffer. Secondly, if we really want to take a critical step towards making houses more affordable and creating the conditions to promote families, we have to rethink very strict regulations on energy neutrality of houses and environmental transition that definitely makes houses less affordable. Thank you.
Housing is the social justice issue of our generation. In my city of Dublin, rents have reached record levels, with the average rent now hitting €2,300 per month, and most young Dubliners have given up on the hope of ever owning a home. As Social Democrats, we have put the housing crisis at the core of our agenda for the next 5 years. We have delivered the EU's first ever Commissioner for Housing, and I am happy that it will be in the hands of a colleague, Social Democrat Dan Jorgensen. We must deliver an EU affordable housing plan. However, there is one glaring omission from the EU Commission mission letter: the issue of homelessness. The EU has set itself the goal of eliminating homelessness by 2030. We have 5 years to go and we are moving in the wrong direction. 4,400 Irish children are homeless. That is 4,400 stolen childhoods. We can and we must house our people, and as has been said, a roof is a right.
1 year ago, here at the European Parliament, we held an important debate on the housing crisis that hits severely many citizens and many families across Europe. Today's discussion confirms that sustainable, decent and affordable housing remains high on the EU agenda. Access to social housing and housing assistance for those in need is a principle enshrined in the European Pillar of Social Rights, and it is at the heart of the social Europe that we want to strengthen. Housing policies are key for social, economic and territorial cohesion. They also are crucial in achieving our Green Deal ambitions. They are policies that take time to bear fruit and need to expand over several decades. Access to affordable housing, including social housing, underpins not only social cohesion, but also economic growth and competitiveness. It is also key to address homelessness, which is the most extreme form of social exclusion and housing deprivation. A lot has been done already by the Commission to promote these objectives, and we can build on this experience to strengthen our action further at EU level. As announced by our President, housing will be a key priority for the next political cycle and for the next college. For the first time ever, the Commission will launch a European affordable housing plan. The plan will aim at taking a holistic approach to address structural drivers of the housing crisis. And this would necessitate a targeted strategy for housing construction, offering technical assistance to cities, member states, but also focusing on necessary investment and reform. Let's start with something that matters a lot on housing, and this is, of course, regulation and planning tools. These are important determinants of housing supply and affordability. But beyond regulation and planning, let's face it, we also need additional resources and better use of the existing resources to address the investment gaps in the building sector and strengthen supply. This is why we will work with the European Investment Bank on a pan-European investment platform for affordable and sustainable housing, a scheme to attract public and private investments. Innovative financial instruments and cooperation with financial institutions on the model of work we are now familiar with under the InvestEU program can help deliver on these two tracks, the supply and renovation of housing. We will also propose to inject liquidity into the market by allowing member states to double the planned cohesion policy investments in affordable housing. Another dimension that we need to address is the energy dimension. Addressing energy poverty remains a key concern for a socially acceptable and just transition. And the key part of this are renewed efforts to reduce energy prices and strengthen the social dimension of the energy union. The Social Climate Fund will support vulnerable households in their energy-efficient renovations, and this is why these relevant plans need to be swiftly and effectively established and implemented. Performant, energy-efficient renovation of the housing stock is essential for the success of the green transition, but also helps us to address root causes of energy poverty. Another track of work would undoubtedly be the revision of our state aid rules that would allow us to enable housing support measures, especially for affordable, energy-efficient and social housing. And finally, by enlarging the new European Bauhaus community, we can build new partnerships for increasing housing affordability and developing new, more inclusive neighborhoods. Honourable members, addressing the root causes of poverty and ensuring access to the essential protection and services will be further prioritized in the forthcoming strategy, the first ever, that we announced, the EU Anti-Poverty Strategy. This is now the time for ambitious action and swift delivery. With a future Commissioner with a dedicated portfolio on housing, we have an unprecedented opportunity to address these challenges in a consistent and political manner. And I notice that the presence of the President of the Group of Socialists and Democrats here in this debate has something to do with this decision. Honourable members, this is a time for change, for a Europe of solutions that help those that are most in need. Thank you.